This morning, we have the privilege of continuing some of the discussions that we've been having throughout the last week, specifically our post-budget discussion. This morning, I have the privilege to sit in studio and chat with the Honorable Senator Laurence Hislop. Good morning.
Morning, Shenell. How are you doing?
I am great, and how are you?
I am good. I am good. Morning, Tobago. Morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
So we see that you have had a lot on your plate recently, even with the youth discussions that have been happening in the parliament. And I want to start off by, touching a bit on that, because there was a question posed to you by one of my colleagues, Luke Trim, and he asked whether or not you felt that Tobago's allocation was enough. And you would have responded by indicating that it's not just about the allocation that was given to Tobago, but about the national allocation and some of, the allocations made at a national level that tend to benefit Tobago. However, there has been conflict whereby members of the administration are wary that the central government takes on projects that are actually under the remit of the THA. How can you speak to that?
I would like for them to identify those specific projects that the central government would take on that are under the remit of the Tobago House of Assembly. Because when you look at the major capital projects that would have taken place over the last 5 years, they're primarily projects under the 6th schedule. So when you talk about police stations, that's national security. There was an arrangement between the then administration and central government for the building of the Roxborough Hospital. Fire station is national security as well. The fast ferries are from a national perspective as well. And so the projects, I would like for them to identify. If you want to treat with WASA, that say public utilities, under the Tobago House of Assembly, those projects that WASA has been doing are largely funded by national borrowings, and so it's not just Tobago that WASA has been rolling out significant development projects on, but they've been rolling out projects throughout Trinidad and Tobago, seeking to alleviate the water challenges that so many citizens have faced, especially in rural communities. And so it is. I would like for the administration to identify specifically what projects they seek.
But we saw that even where tourism is concerned, tourism and tourism infrastructural development, you see the now new introduction of a 5-star hotel being proposed in the Buko area.
Right.
You have that proposition of a marina as well. These are things that, are under the remit of the THA when we look at tourism development. And as we touch on that a bit, I wanted to ask you specifically, do you think that I believe it was 1 million allocated towards developing a marina for Tobago, being exposed to the Caribbean and other territories that have marinas, do you think that $1 million is enough?
No. Well, obviously the $1 million is not geared towards the actual establishment and construction of the marina. Obviously, you have startup works that need to be undertaken. The government is seeking to fund the marina via private-public partnership. So obviously, we're treating here with what you would need for RFP and the initial outlay before you, because $1 million is no shit. Come on, $1 million. $1 million cannot be what you're looking at to build out.
Exactly, because when we think about a marina, we think about persons coming from all parts of the world. We're thinking about having a fuel station when you come up. We're thinking about immigration and naturalization. That process happening right
but
there.
We're
thinking about restaurants.
shops. So $1 million, that's just paperwork.
Okay.
But one of the things, as you touched on the marina, one of the things I want us to zero in on is that as it relates to that's a new service that will be coming to Tobago. We've never had a marina on this island. And it speaks to, are we as a people ready for something like that to take place? Are we ready to take up the jobs that will come as a result of a marina being in our environment. So it speaks to ship repairs and boat repairs and all of these things that go along with that. And so that's where the conversation has to be shifted to a lot. Are we ready to take up what's coming? Because we don't want a situation that the government makes an investment in a marina, and then you walk into the marina and there's little or no Tobagonian working at a high level in the marina, and that speaks to the development going past us and not getting to us. So that's where the conversation needs to take place.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's a conversation that also comes up when we look at the new airport in regards to how involved would Tobagonians be in the hiring process, as well as filling a lot of those high-level positions, those executive positions. And even when it comes to having those business contracts in the airport. Can you speak to that? Do you know about any conversations happening in regards to, let's say, for the duty-free shops? Are there any allocations that would be made to ensure that a particular percentage is given to Tobago businesses?
That's you see, and this is where we talk about collaboration and governance, because there is an executive council in Tobago that is responsible for the governance, for the local governance of the island. And so these are some of the conversations that should start to happen at that level, right? I am confident that the folks that we have at the current airport terminal are well trained and well certified to just move their expertise from where we are into a new building. So it is not, yes, you're moving into a new building, but your services are being expanded. But the services that you carried out at the current terminal is going to be the same management of an aerodrome space. You have a larger terminal to manage, so obviously you're going to require additional staff. But more than likely you'll require additional staff. But it is the same management of your aerodrome that I believe the Tobagonians, because we have our duty managers, our managers at the terminal in Tobago that do an excellent job. So I don't see a challenge. I don't see a challenge there at all.
The recruitment and the call for proposals, I believe that was handled from the airport authority.
Well, obviously, airport authority still manages. Airport authority is the agency that is responsible for the management of our airports and our terminals within Trinidad and Tobago, and so that obviously will come from Airports Authority. But what I'm saying is that we have a governance structure in Tobago that ought to be able to have a conversation with Airports Authority to see, let's look at how we manage this project going well. The rollout of the project. If you have 15 duty-free shops, how many are going to be Tobago based, that kind of thing. That's the kind of conversation that you ought to be having at that level.
Totally agreed. Now, I believe it was in the second budget presentation that the Chief Secretary made in 2023 that he would have highlighted the need for a marina in Tobago as well, right? So what happens when the THA wants a marina in Tobago and the central government wants a marina in Tobago, but I believe that they have different areas that they have proposed the marina for. How do we come together and merge idea, merge resources to ensure that this is not a political
conversations?
Project. It's a project to forward the development of Tobago.
You know Tobago can do comfortably with two marinas.
Correct. One in the east, one in the west.
So conversations need to take place, and we are supposed to be mature in governance, that conversations could take place, that we sit around the table. But you see, we've gotten so accustomed to the shouting at each other. Shouting solves nothing, even in our own personal environment. Shouting solves nothing. Conversations, you sit and you dialogue and you share and you have a vision each, and see where those visions can mesh. Because I tell you something, we people talk about we zeroing so much on the Sandals thing, but the reality is, I am almost positive that some of the persons who are now in governance, who were vehemently in opposition to a Sandals project, wish that the Sandals project had come into Tobago, because the reality is that promise of 100,000 arrivals within a year could have become a reality if you had a project of that magnitude and that quality and that legacy in Tobago. But we didn't speak. We preferred to be shouting at each other across the room. And then what happened? Who lost out in the end? It's Tobago. Tobago lost out in the end. Tobago lost out quality room stock. Tobago lost out on airlift. Tobago lost out on arrivals. We lost out. And so we now have another opportunity, because the government is now saying we're going to send out proposals for a hotel development in Buku again, in the Buku estate. And I want to make this, you cannot build a hotel in no man's land. So we're treating here, the government is sending out, the government is responsible for the Buku estate as part of what would have been the Clico, that whole Clico issue, the whole Clico holdings. So the government is saying we're going to send out an RFP for a hotel development on the Buku estate. We have the Marriott coming. Hopefully everything goes smoothly. That we have them. The reality is, there is a conversation that folks are having that says that we don't need large hotels on this island, that we don't need hotel development. And I dare to say that there is enough space in Tobago for every type of tourism. And there is the guest, there is the tourist who does not want the village experience. There is the guest who just wants a resort to come. I want all amenities dealt with. I don't want to have to think about anything.
All inclusive.
I just want to come and go to a resort and relax. And the sad part about that is that some of us who are opposed to hotel development, when we go on vacation, we look for the same Sandals and the same Marriott and these resorts, and just go and sit down for the couple of days that we're there and do nothing. And the reality is we have guests. Look, I think it was yesterday, St. Vincent welcomed its inaugural JetBlue flight. St. Vincent didn't have JetBlue before. But because you have a resort of the quality of Sandals, you have additional flight airlift into these islands. Right. And so what I'm saying is that conversations are more important when it comes to the development of the island than we shouting and fighting at each other.
Totally understood. Now, we're going to take a quick break right here, and we're going to be back right after this. See you soon, guys. It's a brand new morning, rise up to a brand new... Good morning, Tobago. Good morning, and welcome back to Good Morning Tobago right here on Tobago Updates. And we have been speaking with Senator Laurence Hislop, and we're still having that conversation on the budget. Now, before the break, we were talking a bit about a number of projects that the central government is proposing in Tobago and the need for collaboration. But when we talk about collaboration on projects in Tobago, one of the issues that I feel that I've seen arise is the issue of trust. And the Tobago House of Assembly really trusting the central government to get their projects done. For instance, I believe it was 500,000 that the Minister for Finance had promised to Tobago for 500 million for the Scarborough Sec project. And in this budget, we heard nothing about it. So how do we trust the central government to do the projects that they indicate that they're going to do in Tobago when you hear it mentioned once, but then there's no follow-up on it?
No, but that's the thing. We have to understand that financing of that magnitude, $500 million, the government obviously will go out to borrow for something like that. And I remember that he did say that in the previous budget, but in another conversation, the Prime Minister had indicated that the government will be seeking to borrow or to get financial assistance to build and one of the projects that he spoke to would have been the Scarborough Sec School. And so I don't know where that is at in terms of the process for the funding. But I believe that once the funding comes through it, because we know the Scarborough Sec School is an emergency issue. And so my desire is that it comes through in a quick time. But you see, I want to just spin back on the marina, because you were talking about the conversations, and the information is that conversations would have been held between central government and previous THA administration. Studies would have been done, and the studies revealed that the location that was identified by the Minister of Finance was the most suited location for it. There was even an interest by a company prior to COVID, and those kinds of interests would have just because people needed to reevaluate their economic position during COVID and after COVID, and so when we treat with, so if we just jump back to Scarborough Sec, if we treat with that, I'm confident that once the funding is sourced for Scarborough Sec, the funding will be made available. But you know what I find interesting though is that I yesterday I was in the Backlet area, and I saw a sign that was erected for the sod turning, when the sod turning was done for Scarborough Sec. And the sign says that the project was supposed to commence in January 2024. And it speaks to how do you do a sod turning, erect a sign for the construction of a school when you have not yet finalized the funding. You have no, well, it's supposed to be a design build, but you have not sourced the funding for the project.
And do you think that the administration became frustrated with the promises made from the minister and just decided to find funding elsewhere?
No, but but that's the thing. If you found the funding elsewhere, and that's the question, you have to ask the administration that if they found the funding elsewhere. But even if they found the funding elsewhere, the project should have commenced since January. And so while we may be in a position where you need to have conversations with central government, you have to manage the island in such a way that you also manage expectation. Because when you went and you did the sod turning and you created that euphoria that we are going to start construction for Scarborough Sec, when in truth and in fact you may not have even been at the point where the conversation about funding has started.
But not only in this Scarborough Sec situation, we see the same happening with that development project that was proposed for Riseland, where the Ministry of Planning had promised to seek funding from IDB for that project, and it was then.
Yeah, but the information I have concerned, the information I have concerned in that project, the application
for the funding was never done.
Right, but the information I have concerned in that project is when they reached out to the THA for information and for documentation, it could not be provided. So I'm saying is that these kinds of questions ought to be posed to the persons who are tasked with the responsibility of managing Tobago's affairs. Because when we keep talking about, we keep having this conversation about whether or not Tobago has enough money, the bigger issue that the island faces is how do you manage what you have? Because if we just take up from a biblical standpoint, there's a parable that Jesus told about the men with the talents. And he gave each one a specific amount of talent. And you are to manage what you have. And in managing what you have prudently, you are going to get the gains and the returns that you desire. But if you don't manage it prudently, because one of the things, I in preparing for budget and looking at documents and so on, in 2022, in 1 year, the administration in Tobago spent over $5 million in travel, in official overseas travel. That's in 1 year. And
how much?
Over $5 million.
Okay.
And when we calculate that over a 3-year period, when you look at the numbers over a 3-year period, you're in the vicinity of about 15, 18, 20 million dollars in travel. And so it
But
is.
I remember there was a comparison that was made with the overall travel for the entire administration compared to the travel for the prime
Yeah, but
minister only.
how could you do a comparison between the leader of the nation who has a responsibility to treat with matters that are important? And let me stick up in here. Every single time the prime minister traveled and he returned to Trinidad and Tobago, he shared with the population what he went to do. He gave an account of his stewardship out of the country. And he has done it over and over and over again. We have an administration on this island who travels and says nothing. They travel and we don't know that they're traveling. And when they return, they give no account of their stewardship outside of Tobago. And the question we have to ask is, what have we seen in return for the travel? When the prime minister went out, he went to Shell and to BP. We just saw a culmination of all those travels in the negotiation of Atlantic LNG for Trinidad and Tobago to have additional shareholding in the other 3 trains in Atlantic LNG. We didn't have any ownership stake. And because the prime minister went out as chief salesman, as he always says, and had conversations in the boardrooms of these places, we are now able to be receiving profit share from the trains in Atlantic LNG. We were able, the prime minister in his travels, he was even able to negotiate better tax arrangements with the oil companies.
Right. But do you have a comparison between this administration's travel budget and the previous one?
Well, I certainly provided during my contribution. But the reality is that the comparison between what, let's say, under Mr. Charles, what that administration racked up as compared to this is chalk and cheese. Because I can tell you something, that the allocation for official travel was the actual spend was more than the allocation in the budget for the budgetary allocations. And that is the reality that we are dealing with on this island when it comes to the management of Tobago's resources.
I want to touch back a bit on the Riseland Development Project, Housing Development Project, where you indicated that the reason why the Ministry of Planning had not applied for that funding from IDB is because certain documents that were needed were not provided from the THA. But
You just got the information?
Sorry?
No, I'm just asking if you got the information.
If I got the information. No,
okay.
I'm asking. I'm asking you because I've never heard of this. So this again speaks to the lack of communication situation that we were talking about. And that leads me to ask, how do you bridge that gap between the THA and the central government to have that adequate communication that is needed to forward the development of Tobago, putting egos aside? There was a situation happening where I had a conversation very recently with the chief technical advisor, Mr. Anselm Richards. And if you know Mr. Richards, you know that he's friends with everybody on every side. And he's very close with the Minister for Planning, Penelope Beckles. And he's indicated that they had this conversation in regards to receiving a letter from the ministry in order to allow IDB to assist or give, I believe it was $100,000 US for them to begin that Tobago fund. Investment fund or something like of that nature. The details, I don't have it on hand right now. But after several conversations, she basically went ghost. So how do we create that relationship, right, that has politics aside, that has egos aside, to ensure that Tobago's development is number one on the agenda?
Well, first and foremost, I am not going to take the word of just Mr. Richards. in terms of the relationship.
Well, he provided screenshots here on Tobago
and the conversation between him and the minister. And those are questions that you posed that ought to be posed to the minister, because that's just one side of the story. The other thing I want to remind, when we talk about egos, I want to remind Tobagonians that after the THA elections in December 2021, the leader of the PNM, Dr. Rowley, took a decision to bring a high-level team to Tobago to meet with the new administration. And that was a significant step by a sitting prime minister whose party just lost a local election on this island. And he took a decision to bring high-level persons from his cabinet to sit and have a conversation with a new administration who, by and large, didn't have the kind of experience that was required to run the island. Those conversations took place, and then you had a breakdown in the communication because people started to shout at each other. And I make no apologies for saying this. The breakdown took place when Tobago started to fight Trinidad, and to say that Trinidad this, Trinidad that. What do we hope to achieve? What do we hope to achieve? We've calculated that over the last 5 years or so, the level of development that this island has seen, there has been significant capital expenditure to the tune of over $5 billion by a central government, by a government of Trinidad and Tobago on this island. There was a point where persons in Trinidad felt that too much was being done in Tobago, that too much. When we consider that an airport to the tune of $1 billion, an airport terminal building to the tune of $1 billion that is being spent, it's being constructed in Tobago, do we understand that level of investment that this island is privy to? Do we understand that when you build out a hospital in Roxborough to treat with persons in the East, and we've made it very clear that under this administration, we felt that the East should have been further along because you had a chief secretary and a deputy chief secretary from the East. But you have projects that are the responsibility of the Tobago House of Assembly to roll out, that they've left languishing. They've left Goodwood languishing. They've left, a promise was given that the Bertie Sinclair indoor facility would be built, would be completed by the administration. Is there taking sea blast? And that was given under the pretext that, okay, you had a conversation with stakeholders, and the stakeholders were saying that the space was too small. And when you spoke to the contractor gave the assurance that we had the ability, where it is in terms of the stage that it was in construction, that we had the ability to redesign. We've heard nothing about that. That project is there in grass. The only time that project saw a little bit of care was Independence Parade, because the line of sight behind the parade where the flags were erected, they needed to send somebody in there to cut the bush so that nobody wouldn't see the bush when the photographs are taken. That is, you have Goodwood that is languishing. And we made the point, the political leader, Mr. Dennis, made the point in our last press conference that we hope that Tobago East would have been better taken care of. Because listen, Shenell, the point I keep making all the time is that governance is a continuum. They talk about the debt that was left for this administration. The truth is, when Mr. London took over from Mr. Charles, he made a debt to contractors. He took his time. In the development was done on the island, as well as clearing the debt with the contractors. Governments incur debt. That's what governments do. And people and persons make the comparison and say that the money not enough and PNM had this and that and the other. But I want to remind the persons who are old enough. When Mr. Ojoy Charles was chief secretary, Mr. Ojoy Charles fought for the dispute resolution. got 4.03 to 6.9. Mr. Charles had to treat with a allocation that was significantly less than 4. Sometimes I think Mr. Jack said this week, sometimes 2% of the national budget. But when you look at what Mr. Charles did in Tobago as well with his allocation, development that took place. I don't know if you're old enough, Shenell, to remember. And you see, that's the thing, people don't have a yardstick to measure from, because some of the persons who are speaking may not be old enough to remember these things. And so from that position, then Mr. London took over, and because of the increased allocation to the island, the development in Tobago then took a huge leap.
Understood. I think one of the biggest things is that Tobagonians want to see the Tobagonians in the parliament advocating for Tobago and not for party. So even as topics arise, like the allocation for Tobago being enough, or what does Tobago truly need or deserve, when someone who sits in the parliament says it's enough, but Tobago wants a certain level of development, and based on the history of what we have been given, the level of development that we want to see, when we say we want to see Tobago being the Dubai of the Caribbean, with an allocation for development of $205 million, can we really reach that goal?
And I want to also say this, that we can't take sound bites, because both of our MPs who contributed to the budget debate spoke in a context. And I made the point when Luke had asked me the question at the Youth Budget Talks, that $205 million for development is what, and also we ought not to look at the 205 million in isolation. Tobago's allocation is $2.599 billion. And the reality is, this administration has proven over 3 years that they are unable to manage 10 cents. Because the truth is, $2.599 billion, if you manage how was Shaw Park Cultural Complex built? The allocation was, percentage-wise, was similar or less. Not even similar, it was less. How was the library built? The PNM, just hold on, the PNM took licks for Shaw Park Cultural Complex. It took the PNM, I think it was about 14 years to build it. The PNM took licks for Shaw Park, for the library, and for the financial complex. And the point I keep making is management. That is the point. We, on this side of the divide, on the political divide, let me make that very clear. That's the point that we keep making. It is about management. So, and then when you travel throughout the Caribbean, the level of development that Tobago has for its infrastructure is far superior to a lot of our Caribbean neighbors,
But does that mean we should settle with where
I never
we are?
said we should settle. But I'm just saying that we get to the point sometimes where we almost sound ungrateful. And that is something that we have to be mindful. We almost sound ungrateful, So we get in, and we keep saying it's not enough. But my question is, what have you done with what you have gotten? And that's why I went back to the point of making it that when I spoke about the talents, and the reality is, let me give you one example of something that I advocated for. I remember when I know we run out of time, but very quickly. I remember when I became senator, somebody asked me concerning CNG filling stations in Tobago. I had a conversation with the Minister of Energy. And he said to me, Laurence, that's something that we could look into. I had a conversation with the MPs about it. I spoke to him several times, and the MP said to me, go ahead and jump in it. We pushed. Until a solution came up, which is what we have at Cove, where NGC made a decision that Tobago, because we don't have the infrastructure to put the CNG filling at any of our quick shops, because you don't have the pipeline infrastructure in the ground. And GC said, okay, the buses come down to Cove to fill up. So let's just make that space more customer friendly. They built out pumps. They and customers now, Tobagonians who have vehicles that are CNG, can now go down to Cove and fill up. And so being an advocate is not about shouting. You know? Being an advocate, especially when you are in government, is about having the conversations with the people, with the persons who make the decisions to make the necessary changes.
Right, and unfortunately, we have to wrap up this discussion this morning. But in closing, do you think that the allocation given to the THA in this year's budget presentation is enough?
Every individual on this island wishes that we could have more. I am positive that every individual wishes we could have more, but we have to take it in the context of where we are as a nation. Everybody's coming to the same pie to get allocations, every single. And the MP for Tobago West made a valid point that ministries make requests for allocation. Some ministries don't even get half of what they request.
Right.
But the thing about it is that Tobago, in my humble opinion as a Tobagonian, Tobago has received over and over again a lot more than other places, a lot more than Caribbean islands, a lot more than places in Trinidad.
But even in the same level of advocacy that you've made for the CNG stations in Tobago, do you feel like you have a duty to Tobago to have the conversation with your colleagues in regards to that DRC ruling and that 4.03 to 6.9 being outdated?
No, but the thing about it is, that could have been resolved since 2021.
That's a conversation
that could have been resolved since 2021.
That would take us.
We could have had a minimum in 2021. We could have had a minimum of 6.8% of the national budget. The allocation in this year's budget, if we had the 6.8 minimum, would have been $4+ billion for Tobago. And on top of that, you'd have had lawmaking powers. You'd have had your own Public Service Commission and all of these other things. You'd have had a legislature that is you and the president. So when you make your laws, you make laws for Tobago. We rejected that. And we decided to remain with Act 40.
All right, well, thank you so much for being here this morning. Thank you much for your time. We're going to take a quick break right here. We're going to be back with much more conversation. See you soon.
It's a brand new morning. Rise up to a brand new day.